Hi, hello, and welcome to the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast. This is our inaugural episode. We have no sponsor, but instead are brought to you by Laminator Sheets. Laminator Sheets. You have none when you need them and a million when you don't. My name is Claire, and I am your very honored, very humble, very articulate host. Before we get started, there are a few things I would like to address off the bat. First, I would like to say that Black Lives Matter, and that I am creating this content on the traditional lands of the Kickapoo, Peoria, Potawatomi, Miami, and Sioux tribes. We will always start the podcast acknowledging the inequitable landscape and history of the United States, including the fact that we are a country built on stolen land and developed on the backs of slaves. Stage Manager Supply Co. is my own attempt to bridge generations of systematic racism and oppression by making stage management arts education much more accessible. By breaking down the gatekeeping mentality surrounding stage management, I hope to level out the raked stage of opportunity that we currently have in the entertainment industry. As you may or may not know, I started a YouTube channel called Stage Manager Supply Co., where I am making content in the quest to bring arts education accessibility to the craft of stage management. Once a week on Tuesdays, I post an instructional, goofy, how-to video focusing on the technical skills of stage management. Then on Thursdays, I post this podcast. The podcast was born out of the need to examine the personal side of stage management. I'll be interviewing friends, mentors, colleagues, strangers, and non-stage managers about their unique perspective on stage management. I am so excited to interview these guests on the podcast because all of the people I am going to talk to are, first and foremost, amazing human beings. And secondly, they also have wonderful careers as stage managers or entertainment industry professionals. The real gag of this whole podcast is that I have found a way to be able to take all of the people I admire publicly or secretly and take them out for a virtual coffee, tea, beer, gin and tonic you pick, and pick their brain about their lives, careers, and whatever is on their hearts or minds. 3 disclaimers before I introduce our first guest. Disclaimer number 1. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host. That is me, Claire, and the guest, and do not reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, production, organization, employer, or company. Disclaimer number 2. The host does not presume to be any sort of singular voice for stage management or stage managers. The views and opinions expressed by the host are extremely limited to the scope of her own experiences and are being widened each and every day. Disclaimer number 3. Today in the podcast, my guest and I discuss the Williamstown Theater Festival's internship program. The company has recently committed to reevaluating their internship program as part of their anti-racism statement, which I will include in the episode notes and description of the podcast. While I was financially privileged enough to attend the festival and may have had an overall positive experience there as an intern for my guest, I do not posit or suppose that anyone had the same experience as I did. Stage Manager Supply Co. supports the Lift the Curtain and Unpaid Arts Internships group that has formed in the wake of this pandemic, and strongly believes that anyone who is doing a full-time job should be receiving full-time pay, not just experience bucks. I will also link to the End Unpaid Arts Internship Facebook group if anyone would like to learn more. So, with all that being said, let me introduce you to our first guest. Our guest today is a true delight of a human being, Lindsey Turteltaub. Lindsey is currently the Director of Production at the Williamstown Theater Festival. She is a graduate of both the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television BA program and the Yale School of Drama MFA Stage Management program. Lindsey has an amazing resume of credits as an equity stage manager. Select credits include her 2 summers as the resident production stage manager at Williamstown before becoming the Director of Production. She was the PSM of Hadestown, 100 Days, and many more Off-Broadway productions at New York Theater Workshop, where she is a usual suspect. She has worked for Beth Morrison projects on work from emerging composers and multimedia artists, creating contemporary operas, music theater pieces, and multimedia productions. And maybe her most important credit in my eyes, she is one of my formational mentors and resume references. As an intern and then as an employee under Lindsey at Williamstown, she has had the pleasure of seeing me at my most insecure, most exhausted, and perhaps my most loopy. So now I think she legally has to be my friend and mentor for life. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
I'm so excited to discuss all of this with you. Did I do your introduction justice?
That was a very, very kind introduction, and thank you. It's nice. It's nice to hear about my life from someone else, so thank you.
And someone else who admires you, if you can't tell, very deeply. How are you holding up during quarantine?
Doing pretty well. It has been surprisingly busier than I anticipated it being at work, but we're cracking along, trying to make things work, so it's good.
Amazing. You guys have transitioned your season that was supposed to be in the Berkshires in beautiful Williamstown, Massachusetts, onto Audible. Can you speak on what that process has been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it was a lot about crafting what this new process was going to be. I know, while Audible has a theatrical division and has certainly done a fair amount of recording and translating work from the stage to an Audible process, I think I'm not speaking out of turn when I say this is the first time that they are creating a body of work that has never been actually staged before. Usually the process is about taking something that has already been on stage and adapting it to an Audible process. Whereas for this, we've had many challenges thinking through the producing of these pieces in terms of like, how do we rehearse them? What do we do in terms of actors that are in different time zones,
Sure.
in terms of even thinking about like the scheduling of these pieces, at what point would we be able to actually begin working on these? So depending on, what phase of reopening we were in. So there's been a lot of like creating a producing structure that hadn't previously existed either for Williamstown or Audible, and trying to figure out how we can kind of merge our respective processes into something that was collaborative between the two companies, and doing a lot of Zoom or Chime work. Should we use Chime? Because that is an Amazon web program, similar to Zoom, and obviously Audible is an Amazon subsidiary. I don't know if that's right. It's an Amazon company. So that's, a lot of my tasks have been really kind of working with a core team of producing support colleagues and, generating like, how do we even pull this off and in remote conditions? So that's
it feels like a brand new territory of content. I mean, I did a reading or a staged production with Audible in December, and it was much more hands-off. Like, it was really just the people putting on the show, but they were super supportive. So it's great to see that they're dipping their toe into theater during this pandemic even further.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Mandy wanted to do when we pivoted to the Audible season is obviously we were looking down the barrel of the season cancellation, which was completely devastating to us. We'd been we'd gotten pretty far into season prep for the summer. And when basically the idea behind Audible was trying to get as many people work as humanly possible, given what we were facing in light of a global health pandemic,
Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure that all of your stage management skills that you've developed over the years are integral in building those systems. And I want to get to that, but I want to hear first, how did you start? How did you get into theater? Were you a singer, a dancer, an actor? What did you like doing?
I mean, I guess singer, kind of. When I was a kid, my parents enrolled me in choir and things like that. I got my start in opera, actually. I mean, I wasn't an opera singer by any stretch of the imagination, but my parents took me a lot to see a lot of shows at the Orange County Performing Arts Center, which is now called Segerstrom Art Center, I think, in Southern California, which is where I'm from. And, you know, so I grew up going to a lot of opera, and the Opera Pacific, which was the company that produced opera in Southern California. Unfortunately, they're no longer around anymore, but they created an opera camp. And my dad made me audition. It went really poorly.
What did you
I
say?
am not an opera singer. I definitely forgot the lyrics of my song that I was auditioning with.
Oh my God, amazing.
Yeah, it was definitely not cute. But there was a tech camp, and I had been fiddling around with you know, like the faders on the wall of my middle school to do like what I thought was the most magnificent lighting design ever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was a tech camp in conjunction with the opera camp, you know, that was run by the resident production stage manager of Opera Pacific, Jennifer Cook, who was a mentor for me. And my dad would only let me interview for that if I said if I wanted to be a manager of some sort, you know, and there was a box on what you're interviewing for in tech camp that said stage manager. So I checked that box and I went in and I was like, I want to be a stage manager. I was 11. And the PSM, Jennifer, looked at me and was like, really? Do you know what that actually means? So that first summer I was the ASM, actually kind of the ASM, like I actually I was the ASM of this children's opera, Cinderella. It was kind of a hot mess. I remember being on headset backstage, asking repeatedly to the stage manager, do I go now? Do I go now? And he was like, trust me, I will tell you when you go. But so, yeah, that was a very formative summer for me. And, you know, from there, they thought it would be a good educational outreach program to invite me to PA on their main stage, which was kind of lovely and probably shouldn't have happened because I was definitely a 12-year-old PA on like an opera of huge scale in a 4,000 seat theater with a union stage crew.
Cool.
But so basically, you know, I fell in love with stage management from that process, and I was very lucky to essentially be working on professional shows in my youth. You know, the first production I ever PA'd was The Magic Flute, which had a production designed by Murray Sandak. So like, it was like a 12-year-old's dream. It felt like being in a Where Wild Things Are book. So anyway, long story short, went to high school for stage management. I went to an arts high school, then went to UCLA, loved school, went to Yale, knew I wanted more educational opportunities, and then moved to New York.
I want to touch on your decision to go to UCLA.
Mm-hmm.
It was a BA program. Is that correct?
Yep.
So did you have any discernment about if you wanted a BA program or a BFA, and what did your college decision look like for you?
I was very lucky that by the time I was interviewing for colleges, I had amassed a pretty decent resume through my time at Opera Pacific and also in high school. So I was pretty lucky. I got into all of the programs that I applied for, and I did apply for some conservatory programs. You know, I actually very much thought I was going to Carnegie Mellon until I went there and realized I don't like cold or the gray.
California girl.
It's a very gray town. It's lovely, but it just wasn't for me. Like 16-year-old Lindsey did not enjoy Pittsburgh.
Fair.
It's in Pittsburgh, I think.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Correct.
I would love to say that there was a huge amount of thought that went into BA versus BFA, but ultimately it came down to cost for me. You know, in-state tuition. I mean, I was like, my next step was I was going to NYU, and I like sent my check in and I was like, this is where I'm going. And then my parents and I had a very real conversation about what the costs would be associated with me going to NYU. And so we opted for UCLA, and it was great for me, actually.
Yeah, because were you close enough to go back home while you were at school?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go back as much as I wanted
That's
to.
fair.
It's about 50 miles away from where my family is. But what was really lovely for me was, there weren't many stage managers. It was kind of a double-edged sword. I really did enjoy my time at UCLA, but there wasn't much of a stage management program. There was one class. I stage managed a lot of grad shows. There weren't many stage managers, so I got to kind of do whatever I wanted. And then while I was there, I got to work professionally at like the Music Center of Los Angeles. I spent a lot of time working there, and I got my equity card my freshman year of college when I was doing a
Wow.
piece at the Actors Gang in Culver City. So
That's amazing. And
Mhm.
so after you left college, then did you take time before you decided to apply to grad school, or you went right into it?
I actually, by a complete fluke, had enough credits to graduate after my third year of college.
Wow.
Um, Honestly, it was because I kept stage managing things, and stage managing translated to credits. And then as I was
As
starting
it
my third
does.
year, I was like, I have enough credits to graduate. And I mean, it kind of created a little bit of a crisis of identity for me, because like I am technically should have been class of 2009, but I graduated
Yeah.
in '08. So I'm
Yeah.
neither class really thinks of me as in their class anymore.
Oh,
But
and you can't even drink at that point. So what's the point at this
yeah, and I mean,
rate?
I was also young for my class. So yeah. But when I started my third year, I was like, I can graduate. There's not really a point in me spending all the money for a fourth year of college. And I knew I wanted to go to grad school. I knew that, I wanted a more robust education. I've always felt my motto in stage management is as much as you can kind of soak up and as much training as you possibly can get. For me personally, I know there are many different avenues into the workforce, but for me, I wanted to take more classes. I wanted to get a more in-depth education into both stage management as well as, other aspects of theater. I think in college, there's usually not a lot of training about like, I don't know, in grad school, I had a lot of training in like managing the production process from like a managing director's perspective, and like what the difference is between a LORT theater or off-Broadway or a commercial theater. And that I knew that I really wanted to get more of an understanding of what was out there, and for me grad school was that
Yeah.
avenue, so I went straight in. But yes,
And
I definitely was.
how did you come to Yale as that avenue?
uh Well, I applied for 3 grad schools. I applied for UCSD, Columbia, and Yale. Yale was the most attractive program to me. When I visited, I thought it was going to be super fucking stuffy, and it actually ended up like the people that I met were lovely. They really went out of their way to make me feel welcome as I visited the school. And yeah, I just liked the curriculum. I like,
Yeah.
everything that I saw in terms of like the classes that I'd be taking in the stage management program. I was like, this is absolutely how I want to continue my education. And, it was funny at my UCSD interview with Lisa Porter, who runs their program. We spent the entire interview talking about Yale because she kind of recognized for me that like the structure of Yale would probably benefit me in terms of like what I was looking for in a career. So yeah.
Yeah. And so now you have all this education and you are armed and ready to go out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I really admire about your career is that you haven't just made your name and your primary work in theater. You've done opera, you've done dance, you've done this experimental, cool ass work that I'm so jealous of. And so how did you maintain that varied career, and how did you find those avenues?
Uh, well, man, it kind of happens like, it's all connections, really. Like,
Yeah.
that's all it is like you meet one project, you're like, oh, cool, I kind of sort of do this. And you go, to something else. For for music, again, because I started in opera and music is like a huge passion of mine, you know, anything, classical opera, you know, rock, any of that kind of thing, I've always been passionate about calling to music. And that is,
Yeah.
you know, I'm happiest when I'm calling to music.
Mhm.
You know, I met Beth Morrison when I was in grad school. She's an alum of Yale. She created a program called the Yale Institute for Music Theater and I had an interview with her when I was a first year for some summer work, and she found out that I had done opera before. So there were 3 projects that summer. There were 2 musicals and an opera. And I very much wanted to do one of the musicals because it sounded very cool. But she was like, you have opera experience, go. But it actually ended up being so wonderful that she recognized that in me. And then we ended up having like an incredible artistic collaboration. You know, I've stage managed something like 10 world premieres, you know, at least one of them, I think more, have gone on to win Pulitzer Prizes for music. And Beth is like, kind of, she's a badass. She's created this whole new form. She basically merges a theatrical mode of production, so more like rehearsing in theater, and adopts that on new opera. So, you know, it's not in the same way where you're giving like a standby and a go to every opera singer and you're like saying, maestro, let's take it from, but like it's very much like a collaborative, like we're building this piece together, the same way that it feels like a theater rehearsal room, but it's like doing all these crazy, incredibly complicated music projects, you know, which I've had to create new systems for how I call, how I build shows.
Which, speaking of, if you
Yeah.
have not seen the video, and I will link this in the description wherever this is, of Lindsey calling, is it at BAM? Is that the piece?
The Real Enemies, yeah.
Oh my goodness, it is one of the most fantastic, truly to this day, calling I've ever seen. If you don't know what a tab is, you gotta watch that video because Lindsey is calling them.
Yeah, that feels like you're running a marathon. There's a 1-minute break that is to click track, but the rest of it is not to click track, and it's insane to call. And that's the only time I can get a drink of water.
So do you feel like that you have different muscles when you're doing a music piece or an opera or a straight play versus a musical? And how do those
Very much so. Very much so. I mean, every piece, you know, part of what is so exciting about stage management, I think, is that we are very flexible creatures who have to adapt to whatever the process and the creative team need, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where your focus is at any moment has everything to do with the type of creative team you're working with or the type of project that you're on, right? You know, I feel like singers are going to be looking for certain things very, very closely. In an opera piece, you know, like, I know this is super boring, but just to say it, like,
I'm riveted. I'm riveted. Nothing you're saying is
new music projects, like, singers are always very, very concerned about thinking, like, where can they get cues from the conductor, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to think very carefully about, like, where is your conductor monitor placement? You know, and that is less challenging in a traditional opera format, but like, think about like this opera Dog Days that I did, like Lauren Worsham is under a table holding a mirror with a video camera connected to it, and like one eyeball is focused on the lens of the camera, and she's having to get cues for her singing. So like, you got to figure out how the heck you're going to do that. Like, where does her focus need to be at any point to be able to get the cues from the maestro? And the maestro is far upstage, like he ain't in a pit. Like that's something that is very different than like a classical, like, I hate the term park and bark, but like a lot of people think about like park and bark as opera. And if you think about like more contemporary stagings and more contemporary projects, it usually has a lot of like figuring out that element. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting to me that each process can be so different, but you use some of the, like, our scheduling muscles are very much the same. You just have to tweak them and adjust them to different scenarios.
And also thinking about like what model you have as well. With someone like Beth Morrison Projects, you're usually you're a company that's usually touring to venues that are presenting venues, right? So like, what is the engagement with the house crew? What do you need to prepare to make sure that when you are loading in tech and performances, you're adequately prepared as a stage manager for that versus, you know, a producing organization where you're building that from the ground up. So like thinking about, you know, the different relationships that you have, you know, I was talking about music, but like dance, there's also like concerns about temperature and thinking about, you know, what surfaces they're working on. All of that is really in the wheelhouse of the stage manager to make sure that, you know, you're keeping in tabs on it.
Yeah, and it's so tabs, and it's so varied that I think sometimes it can be very hard for someone who's wanting to do an opera, but cueing opera singers is a whole different world than running a musical, when it's like you got to be where you need to be and it's your fault if you're not. But opera singers, that relies on you to get them out onto the stage.
Sure. I mean, in more traditional forms of opera, yeah. I mean, with a lot of the pieces, the new music pieces that I do, honestly, if I try to cue any of those singers, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" like I know this music better than you. Like, shut up, Lindsay. But yeah, no, it definitely, knowing what they're looking for and what these artists are looking for at any time is a huge part of what we bring to the table as stage managers, you know. Sure. And also being able to call different types of things, because that's also, you know, something like Real Enemies requires a vastly different musculature than calling a straight play, you know?
Sure. We're taking a quick break in the pod to throw in a little clip of Lindsey calling Real Enemies at the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
Go. Tab 703. Go. Tab 705. Go. Tab 707. Go. Tab. Go. Tab 711. Go. Tab 713. Go. Tab 715. Go. Tab 717.
Okay, now back to the pod. I mean, and speaking of calling in different forms, I would be remiss to not mention that you are the original production stage manager of Hadestown Off-Broadway, which I will flex for you. That's a really big deal, and I'm super proud of you for it. Can you talk about your time at New York Theater Workshop and in the Off-Broadway scene of New York? Because I know that you kind of made a creative home there, and how did that happen?
Oh man, it was such a delight to work there for so long. You know, it was my first big PSM job in 2012 when, you know, I graduated grad school in 2011. I messed around for a little bit. I did some projects with BMP. I, you know, PA'd on Follies. And then in 2012, I had my first PSM gig at New York Theater Workshop. I had gotten close with Linda Chapman specifically and June Nicola. Like, they both were huge champions of mine. You know, I had started doing these projects in grad school with them. They do a residency at Dartmouth for 3 weeks over the summer, which they workshop 6 or 7 new plays over 3 weeks. And, you know, the project that I did with them, I did that for 6 years. For those 3 weeks, it was kind of this weird mix of stage management and company management, because like you would be the stage manager in the room for these readings, but then also the administrative offices and producing offices were back in New York. So like, you were the boots on the ground with the artistic team. Like, Linda Chapman was also providing company management services. She has a key labeling method like you would not believe. It would make a stage manager cry. It's so delightful. But so while I was up there, I was very privileged over those 6 years to really like meet 6 or 7 different teams, you know, while I was up there. And one of the teams was, you know, the Hadestown project. We actually workshopped that 2012, I think, 2013, something like that. But anyway, so I'd gotten close with them up there, and Linda essentially acted as my agent for like years.
Amazing.
Where anytime there would be a project at the workshop coming up, she would pitch my name to the directors. And granted, you know, some directors would come in being like, actually, I really have this person in mind. Or they would be like, sure, Linda, I will meet with Lindsey. And then sometimes they'd still be like, but I have this other person in mind. But, you know, there were many opportunities where directors would interview with me, and just on Linda's recommendation alone, and knowing that I'd had this relationship with the artistic team at the workshop, they would give me a chance. And that was how Hadestown came to be. Like, I was very lucky to workshop the original. Like, I still remember, and a point of pride for me, and I'm still so delighted and in love with that creative team, was I was the first person to put Hadestown into script format. Like, Aeneas had
Oh,
yes! Kind of like,
yes!
no. It's like not actually that
No,
interesting.
for me
like,
it is.
But it was very sweet because, you know, Aeneas had been working on this piece for so long, but like, just like corny. Like, I remember coming out of like grad school where I had just had to do my thesis, which was an acting edition, and like all the formatting of the script. And I was like,
yeah,
I got this, Aeneas. Give me your lyrics. I'm going to like capitalize all the lyrics and the dialogue. I like went through and started to help translate that into something that could be a working document for theater. Yeah.
Which is such a skill, which is so hard to establish that relationship with creatives, which is something Lindsey taught me all about. But how to work with a playwright and creative team on the source material and translate it into a more digestible format is a really hard skill to master.
Yeah, and figuring out like, how do you how do you make it so that there is ownership for the playwright in that process, and supporting them, you know, through, obviously stage managers have to connect with the playwright to figure out like, okay, how do you want script changes to happen? Who owns the script change process? You know, it's not one size fits all, and having those creative conversations. But anyway, back to your other comment, you know, I think one of the things, also what was super exciting about Dartmouth, which we'll get to probably a little later in the conversation, was there's actually a class associated with the residency. So that was like one of my first times where like I got really excited about education and like teaching the kids that were working on it, because they'd never worked in a professional room before. But the reason why I thought about the kids is something I talk about, you know, I don't know if you know this, but I was a professor at Pace this last semester.
Well, yes, because I wrote you a letter of recommendation for
yes!
it. And then you never followed up with me, so I'm glad I know now.
I used it, and I got the job, so thank you. I'm sorry that I never
I write a great letter of rec, let everyone know.
Yeah, so one of the things that I realized with young folks studying theater is you kind of don't get a sense of like what the relationship between a stage manager and arts administration can be, specifically like what the relationship between a stage manager and an artistic director can be. You know, that's something that like in collegiate programs you don't really have as much exposure to, like, you know, what is an artistic director looking for from a stage manager in terms of reporting? Like, oftentimes artistic directors want to keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening in a rehearsal room. And that's something that's really kind of beautiful about a relationship that I had with New York Theater Workshop, or that many stage managers have in artistic homes, is that you start to develop a relationship and a trust with the artistic teams of the theater themselves. Obviously, there's a very deep relationship that stage managers have with the creative teams of the room, but there's almost equally as fruitful of a relationship that you can have with artistic teams at a theater, you know, and being able to like pop in and be like, morale is really great in the rehearsal room, or we had this really exciting breakthrough in this scene today, you know. Of course, not speaking out of turn or saying anything that the director wouldn't want you to report back to some extent, but you know, there is definitely like this other layer of like, you're being hired by the theater to be a stage manager as well, so you're kind of supporting, it's this interesting nexus, you know.
It's something I very much learned from you at Williamstown, probably my second summer when I got to basically just sit next to you for a whole show, was how you walk this very fine line in your reports of being an artistic collaborator, truly, in talking, like you're saying, the tone of the room, but also reporting the facts. Like the facts are this, but you also talk about the facts of the heart, which I aim to do and never succeed, but I always think of you because of it.
I've seen your reports. You nail it. I loved reading your reports last summer. So.
Oh well, thank you for listeners of the pod. Lindsey and Williamstown very graciously hired me back as a non-equity stage manager to stage manage their community works production, which is a super exciting, wonderful initiative where actors in the non-equity company and community members from the Berkshires, some of whom have never been in a play before or a musical in their entire lives, we present a professional theater experience for them and create a show surrounding the Berkshires. And it was the time of my life.
And Claire crushed it.
And Claire cried a lot. Claire cried a lot, but she came out the other side a better person.
Learned a lot and crushed it and ran that tech like a beast. So
that was a witch laugh, but it's warranted. Let's talk about Williamstown for a little bit and you being an educator. My first introduction to Lindsey was, I think, just stepping onto the campus. Had you had any educational experience before being the resident stage manager of Williamstown and having to put on intern workshops and a whole pretty much course curriculum of a summer class on top of stage managing 2 shows and overseeing the rest of the department?
Yeah, it was a lot.
Big sigh, big sigh.
Big sigh. I mean, educational experience, not a huge amount. Obviously, I'd done the Dartmouth residency for 6 years. And that was kind of like Williamstown light. Like my preparation for that, like before when I took on that residency in the first summer of that residency, like a bunch of kids would show up and I'd be like, I don't know what you're here for. What are we doing? What's my interaction with you? What are you getting from this class? Like anything.
What's your name? Who are you?
And there were a lot of them. There's like 20 of them.
Oh, wow.
And which is a lot in 3 weeks, like trying to learn who everyone is. But basically what I learned very quickly, I was like, oh, I can craft tracks for you guys over these 3 weeks, you know, like, and in 1 week you could be, I made up a bunch of titles. They kind of didn't exist, but I'd be like, assistant to the playwright. And they'd be like, super excited to like go to the library and research things and basically become like acting dramaturgs for the playwrights in their process for that week. Or if we had artists that were coming up for the summer, you know, that were just like up there to do a residency and work on a play, I would like assign them a student who could also help engage and find resources on the Dartmouth campus. And like that was a huge part of like finding ways to make these students feel like their work mattered and that they were involved in the process. And like a bunch of them were ASMs, you know. Did those projects like acutely need all of those young students on each of the projects? Probably not. And to some degrees, you know, there were definitely much more successful collaborations and a lot more to do in certain rehearsal rooms than there were in others. But, you know, what I realized is if you kind of if you listen to them and figure out like, okay, what are you interested in? What gets you passionate about being, why are you in this class? Like, what are you hoping to kind of like learn and grow from? And then tailor assignments to them that give them as much of a varied experience, both in what they're directly interested in and maybe something else that they aren't. You know, many of those students never came in and were like, I want to be stage managers, but like, you better believe I made them be ASMs on a project. Like, you know, because going back to my philosophy about education, the more well-rounded you can be, the better theater artist you will be, you know? So I had done that. And to some extent, PAs in New York, or really anywhere, are usually educational positions. They're usually entry-level positions into stage management. Now, there's like a whole debate about whether PAs should be that, how that works, you know, that's something that's evolved. But for all intents and purposes, in my lifetime,
Sure.
PAs have been entry-level stage management positions. And so there is definitely like a mentorship that comes with being a PSM to a PA, you know, and having those conversations. But going into Williamstown, those were really my only two educational experiences. You know, I taught a couple classes after Dartmouth. Like, I got asked back by the faculty to speak a couple times to their kids, but you know, that was basically it in Williamstown.
Wow. That's so fun. And then did Williamstown help you formulate what you did at Pace this semester, or any?
Yeah, I mean, well, kind of.
Okay.
I felt like, for me, Williamstown was a little bit easier because, I mean, I'm happy that you guys got a lot out of it, but for me, it was like mostly about waxing philosophical about stage management on a weekly basis. Like, I would definitely pick, like, of course, like, we learned very quickly, like, script change workshop was one of the first things that we wanted to do, because depending on your experience, you may never have been through a process with a living playwright before. And so also getting kind of a uniform understanding of what the expectations of script changes was good to have early in the summer. When I inherited Williamstown's resident PSM position, there had been workshops. There definitely had. I don't think, if I remember correctly, and I don't want to do a disservice to any of my former PSMs, because they definitely led the groundwork, but I do think that there was a really great step up in terms of making education both mandatory and a focus of the summer. I mean, look, everyone has feelings about internships. I have my own personal feelings about internships, but I was like, okay, if you guys are coming here as interns, there's obviously production assignments, and you're going to learn a ton on your production assignments. But it is also hugely important to me that this is an educational experience for you guys, and that you leave having both classes that have furthered your education, that are centered around a topic, and as many guests as I possibly could get up there on a weekly basis, and also a mentorship, you know, because my viewpoint about Williamstown is, when you come and you've entrusted your education to me for 3 months, I wanted to kind of treat it like grad school light. I wanted to like cram as much information into your brains as I humanly could, and get as many other stage managers who were up there for their jobs to also cram information into your brains, so that you could leave, and then I could be a mentor to you guys moving on from the program, you know?
And speaking as someone who was there for your 2 summers, first off, the script change workshop was pivotal to me in my career, and truly laid the groundwork for most of my employment since. And I will be making instructional videos on a lot of what I learned there, so you can thank Lindsey for that. And second off, that was something that I was so privileged to experience, and really laid a lot of also the groundwork for my career, was the people that I met that summer, that you were like, talk to this person for an hour, talk to them. This person's going to, like, Sid Solomon came up, who talked to us about how equity functions. And you got Amanda Spooner when she was going to do a reading for a week. I remember how I felt. I was sweaty, but I was also learning. And
Sweaty and learning, the Williamstown story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So pivoting away a little bit from Williamstown education, I just have been there, so that's something I love talking about. How, as someone who was hiring stage managers, primarily, I mean, you started PSMing pretty early on in your career.
Yep.
How did that work for you? Did you ASM a lot before that? Did PSMing feel like the right logical step?
No, I didn't ASM as much. You know, I really didn't. And honestly, I kind of wish I had. I wish I had had more opportunity. Look, when I was 23 and doing my first show at New York Theater Workshop as a PSM, I was like, definitely like kind of silly young 23-year-old, like very excited to be a PSM and like cock and walk bull. Like I was like, yes, this is so exciting. And it was exciting. It was like a tremendous experience for me. But between that and continue like my relationship at New York Theater Workshop, and then the other projects that I was starting to do, you know, either with Beth Morrison projects or Streb or God, I can't even remember, like Jazz at Lincoln Center. I was always the PSM for them. And I remember interviewing with James Ladis for a show at the workshop that he was going to be PSM for, Lazarus, and Ivo Van Hove's musical of David Bowie's work. And, you know, one of the questions he had asked me was, you don't have a tremendous amount of ASM experience on here. Can you speak a little bit to that? And it was a little sad for me in that moment, because I realized like that they are very different positions. And, you know, that's one thing that I am firmly in the camp of, I don't feel like an assistant stage manager is actually an assistant. I feel like, you know, I am like in the Amanda Spooner camp of like, I feel like they should actually have different job titles, because they are equally important, but different positions, you know, in terms of what their scope and responsibility is. Obviously, there is like a component in the hierarchy to production stage managers overseeing the stage management team, but I don't think of it really in the same like dramatically different hierarchy to the positions. And so, you know, by the time that I really wanted to flex that musculature of being able to like work on deck tracking and props and you know, that those aspects of stage management, I was less hireable for that, you know, really, because my resume was entirely PSM work, you know. And there is also something that I think there's a trap a little bit there, whereas I think I would have been very competent as an ASM, you know, when you have been a PSM for so long. You know, there's a concern potentially, I would say, and I'm not speaking for James at all here. I think this is just something that we talk about in the industry quite a bit. You know, if you've been a PSM for so long, are you willing to kind of cede control of the stage management team and not you know, have your own ideas about how things should be run? And that was something, you know, I read your questions in advance, so forgive me for like veering a little bit. But like, one thing I would say that I definitely have said to you, and I say to most of my students that I've worked with, is the trap that I fell into as a young stage manager, and one of the things that I wish I could say to myself back, you know, when I was in grad school, certainly, was, you know, there's really a trap. Like, we're all very, very type A humans. I think we're very much like, this is the best way to have it be done, and you need to do X, Y, and Z, and it'll get this result. And like, you have like this whole idea in your head about like how a situation should be approached or a production should be managed. you know, and I think there is a trap when you're young to judge other stage managers and what their process is, especially when you're an assistant
Yes.
stage manager.
Yes.
And sometimes I wish if I could like go back to 20-year-old Lindsey and just be like, shut the fuck up and listen and learn, even if you wouldn't like do the same thing that the stage manager is currently doing, and you have thoughts and feelings about it, like there's something that like I thought sounded much more wise when I came to this revelation than it actually is. But I think in order to be a good PSM, you have to be a really good ASM. You have to kind of realize that like it's not about you, check yourself, and it's about supporting the process and supporting your stage manager, you know. So yeah, I forget how I got to this very long-winded
No, but
answer,
it's a good, I think what I heard from what you were saying was, even if the way that a person is approaching a piece of paperwork or a system or whatever isn't what you would do, there's a piece of logic behind it, and it's worth finding out what that person's logic is, because it may not be clear from what you're seeing at the outset.
And even if it is at the end of the day, like, oh, that's not how I ever want to do it. If that's the thing that you learn, that's great. But again, if it's not your job in that moment to like have this kind of internal running monologue going of like, well, I would do this differently, and so like, I think it's really important to step back and kind of understand, or at least try to understand the perspective of the human that's making the choices, you know. So yeah.
One more question. I think I have two more questions for you.
Yep.
As someone who is a PSM and does a lot of hiring and team networking and finding teams, what are you looking for in young stage managers or older stage managers who may be trying to break into the industry? If you have any thoughts about resumes, cover letters, how to network, anything you want to talk about.
I would say, in terms of when I was hiring, as a PSM, I mean, look, I wish, sorry, this is a little tricky of an answer for me, because I know what I personally was looking for. Whether or not that's like applicable to the entirety of like stage management, I can't speak to that.
Yeah, that's fair.
When I was stage managing, you know, the go-to ASM that I worked with the most was Shelley Miles. And the reason why Shelley and I worked really well together is because even though I think I was a decent stage manager, I am, and this is still true, ask Kiri Bayless, who is the production manager at Williamstown last year, and you know this, I am like kind of all over the place in my thinking. Like, I'm very much like, I have to talk through all of the permutations of something and I got to get it out, and like homegirl like does not write down very much. Like, I will just talk at, and Shelley would listen to me and be like, great, I heard all of this verbal sound cloud coming out of your mouth. I'm going to boil this down into actionable items. And, you know, for me, what I would look for when working with an ASM is someone, like, I don't like micromanaging ASM's work. I mean, which I'm sure there are ASMs I've worked with out there who are probably like, Lindsey, you're full of like, you're probably the most micromanaging person on the planet. But like, the times when I was happiest in a working relationship is when I would be like, this is what I would like to have happen and get done. Can you please take that and find a system and run with it? Like, and Shelley, what was so brilliant about Shelley and why she's a genius is she's like, great, I'm going to work with this team of PAs and we're going to create this system, and and usually the types of projects that we worked on together, namely actor-musician shows, we didn't have like a system in place, like in terms of like how we were going to get it done. Like, it was more like we would have to invent ideas, like how the do you tape out Hadestown when like everything is, well, no, it's not even a circle. Like the first permutation of Hadestown at New York Theater Workshop were like, there were different axes for the curves. Like,
Yes.
I literally, as I was measuring it out, I taped Rachel Hauk, who was the set designer, and I was like, here's the like, I was like, I love you so much.
Why did you do this to me?
Because nothing was symmetrical about it. But my earlier point was actually like, it didn't fit in New York Theater Workshop's rehearsal room. So like Shelley literally created like ground plans that she would put in sheet protectors around the walls with like, you are here arrows for the cast. And, you know, there's a photo of the tape out and it doesn't look that impressive, but knowing like that it was truly like 10 hours of taping out excruciating like curves. But, you know, her generating this idea of like, okay, how do we make this easy for the cast to understand where they are in space when nothing actually fits in the room, because the playing space was very much in the audience as well. Like, I'm doing exactly what I said I do usually, which is get long-winded and talk a bunch, but like
keep going.
Can like take my crazy ideas and help me boil it down into like concrete definable steps.
Yeah.
So I think what I would say in regards to working relationships is, I guess my advice to anyone who is interviewing is to try to get a sense of how the person that you're interviewing with works, and figuring out like what you bring to the table in terms of supporting that process. You know, for me, obviously there's also like a great deal of personal relationship building between, you know, stage management teams, because you spend so much time with these humans. You have to like the people that you
have to go want to go out to dinner with them. Yeah.
And if you discover that you don't like that person, then you don't work with them as much. But in general, you know, it's about an easy rapport and figuring out how you guys can complement each other. Now, in terms of the actual tools that I would say, I'm putting on more of my director of production hat on this.
Please.
I get a tremendous amount of stage management resumes. That is, honestly, stage managers are probably, I get the most number of resumes from stage managers, which is simultaneously exciting and also terrifying. Like, there's like so many people that are interested in stage management opportunities. And what I would give advice, I will also say, this is just my personal feelings about it. Whenever I do a resume workshop or talk about cover letters, I say like, look, every hiring manager is going to have their different feelings about this. For me, I would say in terms of resumes, keeping it as clean and legible as humanly possible. I actually don't care very much about format. Stage management resumes tend to take on only a couple different formats. In my experience, you kind of see the same 3 resumes cycling through my inbox for sure.
Yep.
But I am not a clip art fan. Like, I don't send me something that has so many colors that if I print it, I can't read it. Send it to me as a PDF so your formatting doesn't get fucked up when I print it or open it. You know, proofread. Like, I will take a chance on people who have a typo in their resume or cover letter, but I definitely clock it. You know, I'm not the type of hiring manager that like hands a resume if there's a typo on it, but I certainly know many who are. So I would say just the cleanest and most legible that you can possibly have that information. References are helpful in general. I would say include them unless there is a really strong reason to not include them. You know, if it says references upon request, it's an extra step that I have to do. You know, but also, in general, I would say with most resumes, hiring managers immediately scroll through to see like where are the places you've worked and the people that you've worked for. Like references are both the references you have and then quite literally the humans that you've worked with. And then in cover letters, I would just say, for me personally, not making it too cutesy. I do appreciate a sense of humor, but like I don't need like a novel, certainly, and I don't need it to be the fluffiest thing. What I'm looking for in a cover letter is information I can't find in your resume, and I want it to be about 2 paragraphs. If it's much longer than 2 paragraphs, I just have to go through them so fast. I just can't dedicate a lot of time for something that's like a full page or longer. Like, I just want to see, why do you want to work here and what makes you the right fit for this spot, you know?
Yeah, no, that's totally fair and something that I wish someone had told me even when I was applying for college, that admissions officer, hiring manager, they'll look at your resume for like 30 seconds, your cover letter 30 seconds, see who they know, see if you get your points across, and to keep that in mind when you're forming your branding is really important.
Yeah, and I do think, and it's so important that we're having the conversations that we're currently having as both an industry and a nation. I think one of the things that we do as hiring managers need to get away from, and I think I have done this to a certain extent, but I have also been very much guilty of this in the past, is just because there are names on a resume that you might not recognize doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't give that person a chance or an opportunity to potentially interview. I think where we do get into a trap is there's a very small insular community of folks who are doing the same types of projects over and over and over again, which makes it very difficult for others to break in. So I think there is something, as a hiring manager, it's really important to check yourself from just being like, oh, they've worked with such and such and such and such. Great. They're perfect. You know, like you do need to expand your network a little bit more, so you're not just hiring the same 3 people over and over again.
Yeah, that's so heartening to hear, especially because the main point and purpose of this channel is to bring stage management to a more accessible place through arts education and through discussions with amazing people like yourself. I'm going to wrap this up with our last question. I'm trying to think of a title for it. I think this segment is going to be called Tech Week Scaries. I would love to hear if you have any fun, funny, scary horror story or classic moment from a production during your tech week or when you were getting a production up off its feet.
Sure. Yeah, I think the craziest thing I have ever experienced was when an opera that I was doing, Dog Days, which I mentioned earlier in this interview, was we did it first at Montclair in 2012, but then we took it on tour in 2015 to Fort Worth Opera and LA Opera, and then back to New York. When we were in Fort Worth, we'd had kind of a crazy tech process. And this isn't a tech week story, but it's coming out of tech into our first performance. You know, we got a tornado warning that day, and the weather had started to go kind of and we were at half hour / house open, and there was a call for shelter in place is something else. It was like take shelter, whatever the fuck it is, like whatever you're supposed to do during a tornado. Now, granted, I had never experienced a tornado before.
Yes, California girl.
California girl, very maybe one freak tornado in my childhood.
Sure.
So so suddenly I had to evacuate all of the audience and the cast and the orchestra into the dressing rooms and green room area, which was the place that you're supposed to be when tornadoes are happening. Sure. So and all the lighting went out except for emergency lighting. And it is Dog Days is about a post-apocalyptic scenario.
Cool.
Where like
that fits the theme.
Civilization is ending and, you know, there's like a man running around in a dog suit. It's a very weird opera. It's beautiful, but it's weird. So like I have like a man dressed in like dog rag costumes and like this Norman Rockwell looking family and like musicians and like 30 audience members all crammed into the green room at this point.
Oh my God.
And then, so we were trying to figure out what we could do because lightning had hit our building and the power had been knocked out, which basically required us, like we couldn't turn on any of our systems to do the show. So we were like, after we did an impromptu like pre-show talk to like kind of like wait it out and see what was happening, it was very clear that the power wasn't coming back on. So we decided to do an acoustic version of the show, like sing through it. So we brought everyone up and we like set out chairs so that the singers could see the maestro off stage left. Like it was actually really beautiful and meaningful. We got about 11 minutes into it. And then right as a curfew siren is supposed to be triggered in the music, all of the fire alarms started going off in the building because the power had kicked on enough to like trigger all of the emergency evacuation. So then I had to evacuate everyone outside after having evacuated them all downstairs.
Oh, jeez.
And we waited around for about 15 minutes until we were just like, fuck it, we're not doing this anymore. And then we all went to Billy Bob's Honky Tonk with the company. And there's a great photo of like the entire creative team riding a bull, like a fake bull that night. But it was definitely like between the tornado, the lightning hitting the building, the fire alarms, and then the Honky Tonk. That was our opening night for Dog Days in 2015 in Fort Worth. And then that was basically it. So that is the craziest thing that's ever happened to me. That's performances.
Amazing. So good to hear. Lindsey, thank you so much for being on this episode of the podcast and letting me con you into talking to me for an hour.
It's delightful. Thank you for letting me talk your ear off, I hope.
Oh my gosh. No, I appreciate it. And I'm sure everyone who listened is going to have learned and sponged so much from this because you are just a wealth of information. Do you have anything you would like to promote or any social medias that you would like to shout out? I know you're not the hugest social media person, but I figured I'd ask.
I don't have anything to shout out. I mean, I guess all I would say is if there's anything that is helpful to go alongside this, you know, any paperwork, I think, you know, if a page from the Hadestown call script is interesting for you guys to see for any of your, or like the Real Enemies thing or anything like that, let me know.
Yeah, I'll put whatever Lindsey wants to share down below into a little Dropbox folder if people want to peruse it. Lindsey, thank you so much. I'm going to say we're done. With that, thank you all for listening to the first episode of the Stage Manager Supply Co. podcast, brought to you once again by Laminator Sheets. Laminator Sheets. Shoot, is that a piece of my hair in there? A huge thanks goes to Lindsey for sharing her experiences with me. I will put in the description box and the episode notes a link to her interview at Brooklyn Academy of Music, which includes the video of her calling, and I will also link any other materials that she would like to send to me in a Dropbox folder below. Also, a huge thanks to you for listening. I'm no Howard Stern yet. Well, maybe my hair, but I hope my interview skills improve as I talk to more amazing guests and fall into a routine with this podcast. At the time of recording, the podcast is currently only available on YouTube, but I am working diligently on getting it up on all podcasting directories soon. If you enjoyed the podcast, please feel free to leave a comment down below, subscribe, and ring the bell icon so that you'll never miss a new episode of the pod. Thanks again for listening, and I will catch you on the next one. Bye!